1. We're about to dive deeper into this rad 1985 Ford Mustang SVO. You know, when I first saw this listing, I couldn't help but get a little giddy. These SVO Mustangs are like the hidden gems of the 80s Ford performance world, and finding one in excellent condition is like stumbling upon automotive gold. Let's talk more about what makes this car special. The SVO, which stands for Special Vehicle Operations, was Ford's attempt to create a more sophisticated European-style performance Mustang. Instead of the traditional V8, they went with a turbocharged 2.3-liter four-cylinder engine. Now, don't let the small displacement fool you. This little power plant was pumping out 175 horsepower in 1985, which was pretty impressive for its time. The rear-wheel drive setup, combined with that 5-speed manual transmission, must make this car an absolute blast to drive. I can just imagine rowing through the gears, feeling that turbo spool up, and hearing that distinctive four-cylinder growl. And with only 60,000 miles on the clock, this engine should still have plenty of pep in its step. Now, let's talk about that black paint job. A professional base coat, clear coat finish can really make a car pop, especially on those angular 80s body lines. I'd love to see this thing gleaming in the sunlight. It must look absolutely menacing. And those 16-inch wheels? They're not just for show. The SVO came with a pretty sophisticated suspension setup for its time, so those wheels, combined with the four-wheel disc brakes, should provide some serious handling chops. One thing that really catches my eye is that 8.8-inch rear end. That's a stout piece of equipment that can handle a good amount of power. If the next owner ever decides to upgrade the turbo or do some engine mods, that rear end should be up to the task. Of course, we've got to keep it real here. Even though the seller says it's in excellent condition, we're still talking about a 35-year-old car. It's been in storage, which can be good for preserving things, but it might also mean that some seals or rubber components could need attention. When you go to check it out, make sure to look for any signs of rust, especially in the usual Mustang trouble spots like the floor pans and torque boxes. Also, these turbocharged engines can be a bit finicky if they haven't been maintained properly. You'll want to check for any oil leaks, listen for any unusual noises from the turbo, and make sure all the electronics are working correctly. The 80s were not exactly known for bulletproof electrical systems. But hey, if everything checks out, $11,500 for a clean title, low-mileage SVO Mustang seems like a pretty sweet deal to me. These cars have a devoted following, and for good reason. They offer a unique driving experience that's different from your typical V8 Mustang, and they're becoming increasingly rare. Just imagine cruising down the road in this piece of Ford history, turning heads with that sleek black paint and those distinctive SVO styling cues. Whether you're a die-hard Mustang fan or just someone who appreciates unique performance cars, this SVO could be an awesome addition to your garage. 2. We're checking out a real gem on Craigslist, a 1984 Oldsmobile Toronado that's up for grabs at $2,900. Let me tell you, this isn't your average 80s cruiser. This Toronado is a time capsule on wheels. First off, let's talk about that mileage. Only 49,000 miles on the clock. That's incredibly low for a car pushing 40 years old. Under the hood, you've got the trusty 307 V8, which might not be a powerhouse by today's standards, but it'll give you that smooth, classic American car feel. Now, the seller claims this car is in excellent condition, and from the description, I'm inclined to believe them. They've listed a ton of recent work done on the car, including a rebuilt carburetor, new fuel pump, brakes, shocks, and suspension parts. The transmission's been serviced, and they've even touched up the paint on the bumper extensions. That's the kind of maintenance you love to see on a classic like this. One of the coolest features of this Toronado is its front-wheel drive setup, pretty innovative for its time, especially in a full-size luxury coupe. You're also getting some nice luxury touches like dual power memory seats, a sliding sunroof, and even a Z-Bart security power lock system with a key fob. Pretty high-tech for 1984. The brown interior is said to be in excellent condition, which isn't surprising given the low mileage and the fact that it's been stored inside. And speaking of storage, The seller mentions it was Z-Bart rust-proofed when new and has no rust. Music to any classic car lover's ears. Now, I haven't seen this car in person, but the seller rates it as a 9.8 out of 10. That's a bold claim, but if it's accurate, this Toronado could be a real find. These cars aren't as common as some other classics from the 80s, so finding one in this condition is pretty rare. Of course, as with any classic car, you'll want to give it a thorough inspection before pulling the trigger. Check all those electrical systems, make sure the air conditioning is working. It can be expensive to fix on older cars. And take it for a good test drive to feel how that front-wheel drive system is holding up. But if everything checks out, $12,900 for a well-maintained, low-mileage example of 80s American luxury could be a solid deal. Whether you're looking for a unique cruiser or a potential show car, this Oldsmobile Toronado could be just the ticket. Just imagine rolling up to your local car, meet in this brown beauty. You're sure to turn some heads. 3. We're diving into a real blast from the past, a 1965 Plymouth Valiant that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $13,500. Now, I've got to be straight with you folks, this isn't your average grocery getter from the 60s. This Valiant's got some serious muscle under the hood. Let's start with the heart of this beast, a rebuilt Mopar 318 V8. That's right, this compact car is packing some serious heat. And it's not just any old 318, they've topped it off with a new Holly Brawler 600 CFM carb. That combination should give this little Valiant some serious get up and go. Speaking of rebuilds, the 727 transmission has also been overhauled, and they've added a B4M Z-gate shifter. For those not in the know, that's a pretty sweet upgrade that'll give you more control over your gear selection. Pair that with the new starter, exhaust, and battery, and it sounds like a lot of the major mechanical components have been freshened up. One thing that caught my eye is those turbine rims. They're a classic Mopar style that really fits the era of this car. I bet they look pretty sweet against that red paint. Now, I've got to point out a little oddity in the listing. The seller has it listed as front-wheel drive, but unless this Valiant's had some serious custom work done, that's not correct. These were rear-wheel drive cars from the factory. It's probably just a mistake in the listing, but it's something you'd want to clarify with the seller. As always with classic cars, you'll want to give this Valiant a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for rust in the usual spots. Make sure all that new mechanical work was done properly, and take it for a good test drive to see how it handles. But if everything checks out, $13,500 for a 65 Valiant with a rebuilt 318 and transmission could be a pretty sweet deal. These cars have a strong following in the Mopar community, and with those performance upgrades, this one could be a real sleeper at your local cruise night. 4. We're taking a look at a real interesting piece of automotive history, a 1983 Buick Riviera convertible that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $13,500. Now, I gotta be honest with you folks, this one's a bit of a mixed bag, but it could be a real gem for the right buyer. First off, let's talk about what makes this Riviera special. The '83 Riviera was part of the 6th generation, and it was the first year Buick offered a convertible option since 1970. That alone makes this car pretty rare and cool. Plus, it's got that front-wheel drive setup, which was pretty innovative for a full-size American luxury car back then. The seller says it's in good condition overall and runs well, which is great news. With 97,000 miles on the clock, it's got some life experience, but that's not too bad for a car pushing 40 years old. They've put on new tires and done a recent oil change, so that's a plus. Now, let's get real about some of the issues. The seller's being upfront about the car needing some TLC, and they've listed quite a few things that need attention. The front seats are showing their age with cracking upholstery, but they've got seat covers on for now. There's a small oil leak, which isn't uncommon for a car this age, but it's something to keep an eye on. The AC isn't working, which could be as simple as a recharge or might need more serious attention. The cassette player's given up the ghost. But hey, who's using cassettes these days anyway? The power antenna's stuck, one window's moving slow, and the trunk key is MIA, though you can still open it from the glove box release. On the exterior, There are some paint blemishes and bumper cover issues, but that's to be expected on a car of this vintage. The good news is that the convertible top is in good shape and operates well. That's a big plus for a convertible of this age. Now, the seller admits they're not mechanically inclined, so some of these issues might be simple fixes for someone who knows their way around a car. Fuses, for instance, are an easy and cheap fix if that turns out to be the problem for some of the electrical issues. At $13,500, the price might seem a bit high given the issues, but remember, these convertible Rivieras are pretty rare. If you're handy with a wrench and don't mind putting in some work, this could be a really cool project car. Just imagine cruising down the strip on a warm summer night, top down, in this piece of 80s luxury. 5. We're checking out a real gem from the 60s, a 1966 Buick Wildcat that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $7,500. Now, let me tell you, this isn't your average grocery getter from the 60s. This Wildcat's got some serious muscle under the hood. First off, let's talk about that engine. We're looking at a 401 cubic inch nailhead V8, a true Buick classic that's known for its torque and distinctive sound. Paired with a 400 turbo transmission, this powertrain combo should give you plenty of grunt for cruising or showing off at the stoplight. The seller says the car's in good condition, and with only 41,000 miles on the odometer, it's certainly a low-mileage example for its age. Now we've got to take that mileage with a grain of salt. It could have rolled over, but even if it has, that's still pretty low for a car from '66. One thing that caught my eye is the mention of a custom paint color. That could mean anything from a period-correct color that wasn't standard for this model to a more modern custom job. Either way, it adds a unique touch to this Wildcat. The good news is that this Buick is running and currently licensed. The seller even says you can drive it home after payment, which is always a good sign. It suggests that the car is in decent running condition and not just a pretty lawn ornament. Now, I've got to be straight with you folks. The listing is a bit sparse on details. We don't know much about the car's history, any restoration work that might have been done, or the condition of the interior. The sellers included some pictures of another car and motor for possibilities, which is intriguing but a bit vague. At $7,500, this Wildcat could be a pretty sweet deal if everything checks out. These aren't as common as some other muscle cars from the era, so finding one in good, drivable condition isn't an everyday occurrence. As always with classic cars, you'll want to give this Wildcat a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for rust in the usual spots, make sure that nailhead is running smoothly, and take it for a good test drive to see how it handles. 6. We're diving into a real gem from the early 60s, a 1963 Chrysler New Yorker that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $12,000. Now, let me tell you, this isn't your average vintage cruiser. This New Yorker sounds like it's a true time capsule. First off, let's talk about what makes this car special. The '63 New Yorker was part of Chrysler's luxury lineup, and it's got that classic early 60s styling that just oozes cool. But what really catches my eye here is that this is claimed to be a one-owner car. That's pretty rare for a vehicle that's pushing 60 years old. The seller is really talking this car up, folks. They're claiming it has zero rust, which, if true, is absolutely incredible for a car of this age. They're also saying it's in near-perfect condition and absolutely beautiful. Now, I haven't seen this car in person, so we've got to take these claims with a grain of salt, but if it's even close to what they're describing, this could be a real find. One of the coolest features of this New Yorker is the push-button transmission. That was a real space-age feature back in the day, and it's something that always gets attention at car shows. The odometer is showing 100,000 miles, which isn't bad at all for a car of this vintage. Remember, these old cars were built to last, and if it's been well maintained, which it sounds like it has, it could still have plenty of life left in it. Now, the listing is a bit light on specific details. We don't know what engine it's got, though New Yorkers of this era typically had big V8s, and we don't have any info on recent maintenance or restoration work. But the seller does say it's turnkey and ready to go, which suggests it's in good running condition. At $12,000, if this car is as good as described, it could be a pretty sweet deal. These aren't as common as some other classics from the era, so finding one in top condition isn't an everyday occurrence. As always with classic cars, you'll want to give this New Yorker a thorough inspection before making a deal. Even though the seller claims zero rust, check all the usual trouble spots. Make sure that push-button transmission is working smoothly and take it for a good test drive to see how it handles. But if everything checks out, this could be your ticket to some serious 60s luxury car cool. Just imagine cruising down the boulevard in this New Yorker, feeling like $1 million behind that big steering wheel, maybe even playing some period-correct tunes on the radio. It's not just a car, folks, it's a time machine. 7. We're taking a look at a real blast from the past. A 1974 Oldsmobile Delta 88 convertible that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $3,700. Now, I've got to be straight with you folks, this one's a bit of a mixed bag, but it could be a fun project for the right person. Let's start with the good stuff. This Delta 88 is packing a 350 V8 under the hood, paired with an automatic transmission. The seller says it runs and drives well, which is always a good start. With only 63,188 miles on the odometer, it's got relatively low mileage for a car pushing 50 years old. They've done some recent maintenance too. New radiator, new plugs and wires, and the brakes are in good shape. The tires are said to be great, and the heater is working, which is nice for those chilly cruises. Now let's get real about some of the issues. The seller's being upfront about the car needing some work, and there are quite a few things that need attention. The biggest concern is the lots of heavy rust around wheel wells. That's something you'll definitely want to inspect closely, as rust can be a real killer for these old cars. The convertible top won't go up and down, which is a bummer for a convertible, and the AC isn't working. A few of the back windows don't roll up, so that's another thing to add to the fix-it list. The paint's faded on top, which isn't unusual for a car that's spent time in the San Diego sun. But hey, a little patina can add character, right? Despite its issues, the seller describes it as a cool beach cruiser that gets lots of thumbs up. And I can believe it. These big 70s convertibles have a certain presence that's hard to match. Just imagine cruising down the coast, that 350 V8 rumbling away, soaking up the sun. Just remember to bring a hat since that top isn't working. At $3,700, you're not getting a show car here, but you are getting a piece of 70s Americana that could be a fun weekend project. If you're handy with a wrench and don't mind putting in some work, this Delta 88 could be a cool ride with some TLC. As always, I'd recommend a thorough inspection before making a deal. That rust issue is particularly concerning and could be a deal breaker if it's too extensive. But if you're looking for a unique classic that'll turn heads at the beach or your local cruise night, and you're not afraid of a project, this Oldsmobile Delta 88 convertible could be just the ticket. 8. We're diving into a real gem from the early 70s, a 1971 Oldsmobile Delta 88 Royale convertible that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $1,100. Let me tell you folks, this isn't your average cruiser. This Delta 88 looks like it's been treated with some serious TLC. First off, let's talk about what's under the hood. We're looking at the legendary 455 Rocket V8 engine, a true powerhouse that Oldsmobile was famous for. Paired with an automatic transmission, this powertrain combo should give you plenty of smooth cruising power and that distinctive Oldsmobile rumble. The seller says the car's in excellent condition, and from the description, it sounds like they might be right on the money. With 124,680 original miles, it's got some life experience, but that's not bad at all for a car pushing 50 years old. The fact that it's had the same owner since 1989 is a great sign. That's over 30 years of consistent care. Now let's talk features. This Delta 88 is loaded with the good stuff: power windows, power front seat, AC, and cruise control. That's some serious luxury for 1971. The convertible top is only a few years old, which is fantastic news for a convertible of this vintage. No worries about leaks or tears here. The seller mentions that it runs and drives smooth, which is exactly what you want to hear about a classic like this. They've kept it garaged, which explains why it's in such good shape. A garaged classic is always a good find, folks. At $11,500, this Delta 88 Royale convertible could be a pretty sweet deal if everything checks out. These aren't as common as some other classics from the era, especially in convertible form, so finding one in excellent condition isn't an everyday occurrence. As always with classic cars, you'll want to give this Delta 88 a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for any hidden rust, though being garaged should have helped prevent that. Make sure all those power accessories are working and take it for a good test drive to see how that 455 rocket performs. But if everything looks good, this could be your ticket to some serious 70s cruising cool. Just imagine rolling up to your local car show or taking a weekend drive with the top down, that big Olds V8 purring away. It's not just a car, folks. It's a time machine on wheels. 9. We're taking a look at a piece of American automotive history, a 1965 Ford Thunderbird that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $6,500. Now I've got to be straight with you folks. This one's not exactly a show queen, but it could be a diamond in the rough for the right buyer. First off, let's talk about what makes the 65 Thunderbird special. This was part of the fourth generation of T-Birds, known for their sleek, jet-age styling and luxury features. These cars were all about cruising in style, and they've got a cool factor that's hard to beat. Now, the seller's description is pretty sparse, but let's break down what we know. The odometer's showing around 99,000 to 100,000 miles, which isn't too bad for a car pushing 60 years old. The transmission is automatic, which is typical for these luxury cruisers. Here's where we need to keep it real. The seller admits that this T-Bird needs paint. That could mean anything from a few touch-ups to a full repaint job, so you'll want to inspect it closely. The fact that they drove it from Lebanon, I'm assuming they mean Lebanon, PA, not the country, is a good sign that it's at least running well enough for a decent trip. The price tag of $6,500 reflects the fact that this isn't a fully restored, show-ready car. It's more of a driver-quality classic that needs some TLC. But hey, that could be a good thing if you're looking for a project car or something you can fix up over time without breaking the bank. As always with classic cars, especially ones that need some work, you'll want to give this Thunderbird a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for rust in the usual spots, make sure that engine's running smoothly, and take it for a good test drive to see how it handles. But if everything checks out mechanically, this could be a really cool project car. Just imagine cruising down the strip in this piece of 60s Americana, that distinctive Thunderbird profile turning heads wherever you go. With some elbow grease and maybe a fresh coat of paint, you could have a real stunner on your hands. 10. We're diving into a real beast of a machine, a 1972 Dodge Swinger that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $12,500. Now let me tell you, this isn't your grandma's Sunday cruiser. This Swinger's been built for some serious street action. First off, let's talk about what's under that fiberglass Hemi hood. We're looking at a built 360 V8 with aluminum heads that's reportedly pushing out a whopping 650 horsepower. The seller even mentions they've got a dyno sheet to back up that claim. This engine's been seriously beefed up with a ProCharger, MSD ignition, Edelbrock parts, and a big Holley carburetor. It's like a who's who of performance parts under there. The drivetrain's been upgraded to handle all that power too. We're talking about a 727 transmission with a reverse valve body, that's drag race territory folks, and a 3.91 Posey rear end. This Swinger's been set up to launch hard and fast. Now, I've got to be straight with you. This car isn't currently running. The seller says it needs some wiring work and good fuel to fire up. So we're looking at a project car here, not a turnkey ride. But with all those performance parts already installed, you're getting a head start on building a seriously potent street machine. The odometer shows 56,000 miles, but the seller mentions it's rolled over, so the actual mileage is unknown. That's pretty common for cars of this vintage, especially ones that have seen some racing action. Speaking of racing, this Swinger's got an inside cage, which tells you it was built for some serious speed. The fuel cell is another race-inspired addition that adds safety and performance. At $12,500, you're not getting a show car here, but you are getting a ton of performance potential. If you're handy with wrenches and wiring, and you've been dreaming of owning a tire-shredding piece of Mopar muscle, this could be your chance. As always, I'd recommend a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check out that cage installation, Make sure all those performance parts are in good shape, and maybe bring along a buddy who knows their way around high-performance engines. But if everything checks out, and you're up for a project, this 72 Dodge Swinger could be one hell of a ride. Just imagine getting this beast running, dialing in that Pro Charger, and unleashing all 650 horses at your local drag strip or street race. Legally, of course. Remember, folks, sometimes the most rewarding builds are the ones you finish yourself. This Swinger's got a ton of potential. It just needs the right enthusiast to unleash it. 11. We're diving into a real piece of automotive history, a 1950 Ford Business Coupe that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $9,500. Now, let me tell you, this isn't your average grocery getter. This Ford's got some serious potential for the right buyer. First off, let's talk about what makes this car special. The 1950 Ford was part of the first post-war redesign for Ford, and these business coupes are becoming increasingly rare. Under the hood, we've got the iconic flathead V8, an engine that's practically synonymous with early hot rodding. Paired with a 3-speed manual transmission, this powertrain combo is a true blast from the past. The seller describes the car as a solid original, which is music to the ears of any vintage car lover. Finding an unmolested example of these old Fords isn't easy these days, so this could be a real gem. They mention it's been in storage for a very long time, which explains its survival, but also hints at some of the work it might need. Now, let's get real about the condition. The seller's being upfront that while the car runs, stops, and drives, it will need to be gone through. That's classic car speak for it needs work. The good news is that the flathead V8 starts and idles smoothly without overheating. That's a great starting point for any project. The odometer has rolled over, so we don't know the true mileage. But on a 70-plus-year-old car, that's not unusual, and the mileage is less important than the overall condition anyway. At $9,500, this Ford could be a pretty sweet deal depending on how much work it needs. The seller suggests it could make a great custom, hot rod, or restoration project, and I couldn't agree more. These old Fords are versatile platforms that respond well to all kinds of builds. As always with classic cars, especially ones that have been in long-term storage, you'll want to give this Ford a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for rust in the usual spots, make sure that flathead V8 is as healthy as it sounds, and take a good look at the brakes and suspension. But if everything checks out, this could be your ticket to some serious vintage cool. Just imagine cruising down the strip in this piece of Americana, that flathead V8 rumbling away, turning heads wherever you go. Whether you keep it stock, turn it into a period-correct hot rod, or go full custom, this 1950 Ford Business Coupe has tons of potential. 12. We're taking a look at a real piece of 80s muscle car history, a 1981 Pontiac Trans Am that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $11,500. Now, I've got to be straight with you folks, this listing's got a bit of a twist that we need to talk about. First off, the seller's describing this as a 79 Trans Am with a 403 engine, but they've listed it as an 81 model. That's a bit confusing, so you definitely want to clarify that with the seller. The 403 was indeed available in the 79 Trans Am, so it's possible this is actually a 79 model. Now let's talk about what we do know. The seller says it runs perfectly and is nice and clean, which is always good to hear. With only 13,245 miles on the odometer, it's got surprisingly low mileage for a car of this age. However, keep in mind that the odometer could have rolled over, so you'll want to verify the true mileage. The car's got some nice features, including 4-wheel disc brakes and a newer master cylinder. That's good news for stopping power, which you'll need with that big 403 V8 under the hood. But let's be real, this Trans Am isn't perfect. The seller's being upfront about a few issues. It needs new tires from sitting, which is pretty common for cars that haven't been driven regularly. There are a couple of small spots of rust, which you'll definitely want to check out in person to assess how serious they are. The carpet kit needs replacing, and the lock cylinders for the glove box and trunk need attention. At $11,500, the seller admits they're not sure of the value and are open to serious offers. That's actually refreshing honesty in the classic car world. Now, despite these issues, a Trans Am from this era with the 403 engine could be a really cool project. These cars have a strong following, thanks in part to their iconic styling and their starring role in movies like Smokey and the Bandit. As always with classic cars, especially ones with some known issues, you'll want to give this Trans Am a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check those rust spots carefully, make sure that 403 is running as smoothly as claimed, and take it for a good test drive if possible. 13. We're diving into a real piece of 70s American muscle, a 1977 Chevrolet Corvette that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $10,500. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average C3 Corvette. This one's got a story to tell. First off, let's talk about what's under the hood. We're looking at the classic 350 cubic inch V8 paired with a 350 transmission, a combo that's as American as apple pie. The seller says it runs and drives, which is always a good start for a car of this vintage. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This Corvette was previously owned by an elderly person and rarely driven. In fact, the seller says it's just out of long-term hibernation. That could be a double-edged sword, folks. On one hand, it means this Vetta hasn't been beaten up or thrashed around. On the other hand, cars don't always like to sit for long periods, so it might need some attention in various areas. The odometer shows 50,000 miles, which is pretty low for a 46-year-old car. But remember, with classic cars, it's always good to verify the mileage if possible. Let's talk about the good stuff. The matching T-tops are included, which is great news for those sunny day cruises. The seller's done a fresh oil change, and they've checked that several key systems are working. Headlights pop up and down, heater works, turn signals are operational, and the wipers are good to go. That's a solid starting point. However, it's not all perfect. The tires show wear, so you might be looking at a new set in the near future. And while the seller describes the condition as good, we've got to remember that this is a car that's been sitting for a while. It might need some additional TLC to get it back to its former glory. The orange paint is a classic 70s color choice, and if it's original, that could be a big plus for collectors. However, the seller doesn't mention the condition of the paint or interior, so that's something you'd want to check out in person. At $10,500, this Corvette could be a pretty sweet deal if everything checks out. These C3 Corvettes have a strong following, and prices have been on the rise in recent years. As always with classic cars, especially ones that have been sitting for a while, you'll want to give this Vette a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for any hidden rust, make sure that 350 V8 is running as smoothly as claimed, and take it for a good test drive if possible. But if everything looks good, this could be your ticket to some serious 70s sports car cool. Just imagine cruising down the strip in this orange beauty, T-tops off, that V8 rumbling away. With some TLC, this 77 Corvette could be a real head-turner at car shows or just cruising around town. 14. We're diving into a real gem from the 80s, a 1983 Oldsmobile Cutlass that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $15,000. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average Cutlass. This one's a true time capsule. First off, let's talk about what makes this Cutlass special. We're looking at a 4-door Cutlass Supreme Brougham, which is a bit rarer than the more common coupe versions. But what really sets this car apart is its incredibly low mileage, less than 20,000 original miles. That's practically unheard of for a car that's pushing 40 years old. The seller says it's been a one-family ownership car, always in California, properly maintained, and garage kept. That's music to any classic car lover's ears. It's got a clean title, no accidents, and it's even got registration good through January 2025. Talk about a worry-free classic. Now let's talk about condition. The seller describes it as excellent, and from the description it sounds like they're not far off. The vinyl roof is said to be near perfect, which is often a trouble spot on these older cars. The interior is described as being in great shape with plush, cushiony seats. And get this, it even passes smog. That's a big deal for a classic car in California. But let's keep it real. No 40-year-old car is perfect. The seller's being upfront about a few minor issues. There are some small body defects, but importantly, no rust. The clock isn't working, the passenger side mirror has an issue, and the headliner is sagging. The AC needs a refrigerant recharge, and there's a small issue with the driver's seat movement. But honestly, for a car of this age, that's a pretty short list of problems. At $15,000, this Cutlass isn't cheap, but you're paying for the incredibly low mileage and excellent overall condition. These Cutlass models have a strong following, and finding one with such low miles is truly rare. As always with classic cars, you'll want to give this Cutlass a thorough inspection before making a deal. But if everything checks out, this could be a fantastic addition to any collection or just a supremely cool daily driver. Just imagine cruising down the strip in this beautiful blue piece of 80s luxury, turning heads with its pristine condition and classic styling. With some minor TLC, this '83 Cutlass could be a real showstopper at car meets or just cruising around town. 15. We're diving into a real piece of American automotive history, a 1959 Ford Thunderbird that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $13,000. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average T-Bird. This one's got some stories to tell and plenty of potential. First off, let's talk about what makes the '59 Thunderbird special. This was part of the second generation of T-Birds, known for their sleek, square bird styling and luxury features. These cars were all about cruising in style, and they've got a cool factor that's hard to beat. Now the sellers being upfront that this is a project car they weren't able to finish. But don't let that scare you off because they've already done a ton of work. We're talking new carb, timing chain, water pump, fuel pump, push rods and lifters, alternator, ignition components, battery, starter, radiator, brake lines, mufflers, and even a new gas tank. That's a serious list of upgrades and replacements, folks. The odometer's showing 68,000 miles, but it's broken, so take that with a grain of salt. The good news is that the car runs well, which is always a great starting point for any project. One of the coolest things about this T-Bird is its history. It's been family-owned its whole life and is described as a dry survivor car with minimal to no rust. That's huge for a car of this vintage. The seller also mentions there are no major dents, and all the trim and windows are in great shape. That's a solid foundation to work with. Now let's keep it real. This bird isn't ready to fly just yet. The power windows aren't working, the AC's out. Though it's cool that it's an AC car, and it needs a new dash pad and carpet. But honestly, for a 60-plus-year-old car, that's not a bad list of things to address. One of the coolest features is the set of new Coker white wall tires. Those alone are a pricey upgrade and will really set off the look of this classic once it's all spruced up. At $13,000, you're getting a car with a lot of potential and a lot of recent mechanical work already done. These second-gen Thunderbirds have a strong following, and prices have been on the rise in recent years. As always with classic cars, especially project cars, you'll want to give this T-Bird a thorough inspection before making a deal. But if everything checks out, this could be your ticket to owning a true piece of 50s automotive luxury. 16. We're taking a look at a real gem from the 80s, a 1984 Buick Riviera that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $8,000. Now, I've got to be honest with you folks, this listing's a bit sparse on details, but from what we can see, this Riviera might just be a hidden treasure. First off, let's talk about what makes the '84 Riviera special. This was part of the sixth generation of Rivieras, known for their sleek, aerodynamic styling and front-wheel drive layout. Pretty innovative for a luxury car of that era. Under the hood, we've got a V8 engine, which should provide plenty of smooth cruising power. The seller claims this Riviera is in excellent condition, and there are a few things that back that up. With only 79,000 miles on the clock, it's got relatively low mileage for a car pushing 40 years old. Even better, it's been garaged its entire life. That's music to any classic car lover's ears. The current owner is only the second owner, which often bodes well for a car's history and maintenance. Now let's talk about condition. The seller says it runs and drives excellently, and everything works great. That's a pretty bold claim for a car of this age, but if it's true, that's fantastic news. They also mention that the interior is in great shape, which is often a weak point on cars from this era. The brown paint color is a classic choice for these luxury cruisers, and if it's original and in good condition, that's a big plus for collectors. At $8,000, this Riviera could be a pretty sweet deal if everything checks out. These cars have a strong following, and finding one in excellent condition with low mileage isn't an everyday occurrence. Now, I've got to keep it real with you. The listing is pretty light on specifics. We don't know about any recent maintenance, the condition of the paint, or any potential issues. As always with classic cars, you'll want to give this Riviera a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for any hidden rust, make sure all those electrical systems are working as claimed, and take it for a good test drive. But if everything looks good, this could be your ticket to some serious 80s luxury car cool. Just imagine cruising down the boulevard in this brown beauty, feeling like $1 million behind that plush interior. With its low mileage and garaged history, this '84 Riviera could be a real head-turner at car shows or just cruising around town. 17. We're taking a look at a real piece of 80s Americana, a 1980 Oldsmobile Cutlass that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $5,300. Now, I've got to be straight with you folks. This listing's a bit light on details, but this Cutlass could be a cool project for the right buyer. First off, let's talk about what makes the '80 Cutlass special. These G-body Oldsmobiles were popular back in the day for their blend of style, comfort, and performance. Under the hood, we've got a V8 engine, which should give this Cutlass some decent get up and go. The seller describes the car as nice and says it runs great, which is always good to hear about a car that's pushing 43 years old. With 67,481 miles on the odometer, it's got relatively low mileage for its age, which is another plus. Now, let's keep it real. The seller admits this Cutlass needs some TLC. That's pretty typical for a car of this vintage, and it could mean anything from minor cosmetic work to more substantial mechanical attention. They're being upfront about it, which I appreciate. At $5,300, this Cutlass is priced in the range where it could be a fun project car for someone looking to get into classic car ownership without breaking the bank. These G-body Oldsmobiles have a strong following, and with some work, they can be turned into real head-turners. However, I've got to point out that this listing is pretty sparse on details. We don't know about the condition of the body, interior, or any specific mechanical issues. The seller invites potential buyers to come check it out for themselves, which is always a good idea with classic cars. As always with older vehicles, you'll want to give this Cutlass a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for rust in the usual spots, make sure that V8 is running as smoothly as claimed, and take a good look at the interior condition. But if everything checks out, this could be your ticket to some classic 80s cruising cool. Just imagine rolling down the strip in this piece of Oldsmobile history, maybe with some period-correct tunes playing on the stereo. With some TLC, as the seller suggests, this '80 Cutlass could be a real conversation starter at car shows or just cruising around town. Remember, folks, sometimes the most rewarding classics are the ones that need a little love. This Cutlass sounds like it's got potential. It just needs the right enthusiast to bring it back to its full glory. If you're looking for a project car with some vintage charm, this might just be the one for you. 18. We're diving into a real piece of 60s American iron, a 1964 Ford Galaxy 500 that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $11,000. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average family cruiser. This Galaxy's got some cool features that make it stand out. First off, let's talk about what's under the hood. We're looking at a 289 cubic inch V8, a solid, reliable engine that's got plenty of aftermarket support if you're thinking about some upgrades down the line. It's paired with a 2-speed automatic transmission, which was pretty standard fare for these big cruisers back in the day. Now, this isn't the sportier 2-door version that some folks might be after, but don't let that 4-door body style fool you. These big Fords have a certain presence on the road that's hard to match. And in black? Man, that must look sharp. The seller's added some nice touches to this Galaxy. It's got power brakes and power steering, which make this big boat a lot easier to handle. The power driver's seat is a cool luxury touch for a car of this era. And check this out. They've added coil-over rear shocks, which could really improve the ride and handling compared to the stock setup. The seller describes the condition as good, which is promising for a car pushing 60 years old. However, they're pretty light on details about the overall condition of the body, interior, and mechanicals. That's something you definitely want to check out in person. At $11,000, this Galaxy 500 is priced in a range where it could be a cool cruiser for someone looking to get into classic car ownership without breaking the bank. These big Fords have a strong following, and while they might not command the prices of some other 60s muscle cars, they've got a cool factor all their own. As always with classic cars, you'll want to give this Galaxy a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for rust in the usual spots. Make sure that 289 V8 is running as smoothly as it should, and take a good look at the interior condition. But if everything checks out, this could be your ticket to some classic 60s cruising cool. Just imagine rolling down the strip in this big black beauty, that V8 rumbling away, feeling like you're king of the road. With some TLC and maybe a few personal touches, this 64 Galaxy 500 could be a real head-turner at car shows or just cruising around town. 19. We're diving into a real gem from the C3 era, a 1980 Chevrolet Corvette that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $12,500. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average 80s vet. This one's got a story to tell. First off, let's talk about what makes this Corvette special. We're looking at a one-owner car since new, and get this, it was owned by a lady. That's pretty rare for a sports car of this vintage. It's a California car too, which often means less worry about rust and other weather-related issues. Under the hood, we've got the classic Chevy V8, paired with an automatic transmission. Now, 1980 wasn't exactly a high point for horsepower due to emissions regulations, but these C3 Corvettes still had plenty of style and presence. The seller claims it's in original condition, never restored, with its original paint and interior. That's music to the ears of any classic car lover. With only 48,000 original miles on the clock, it's got surprisingly low mileage for a 43-year-old car. Now let's talk features. It's got AC, power steering, power windows, and locks. All the comfort features you'd want in a cruiser. The glass T-tops are a classic Corvette feature that'll let you enjoy open-top driving when the weather's nice. And how cool is it that the FM radio still works? That's not always a given with cars of this age. The seller's been keeping up with maintenance too. We're talking new tires, new plugs and wires, new radiator, new brakes, fresh fluids, and a rebuilt carburetor. That's a solid list of recent work that should give the new owner some peace of mind. At $12,500, this Corvette is priced pretty reasonably for a low-mileage, well-maintained example. The C3 Corvettes have a strong following, and prices have been trending upward in recent years. As always with classic cars, you'll want to give this vet a thorough inspection before making a deal. But if everything checks out, this could be a fantastic opportunity to own a piece of American sports car history. Just imagine cruising down the coast in this silver beauty, T-tops off, that V8 rumbling away. With its originality and low mileage, this 80 Corvette could be a real head-turner at car shows or just cruising around town. 20. We're diving into a real piece of automotive history, a 1962 Chevrolet Corvair convertible that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $4,500. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average project car. This Corvair's got some potential. First off, let's talk about what makes the Corvair special. These were Chevy's answer to the VW Beetle, with a rear-mounted air-cooled engine, pretty innovative for an American car of that era. This one's got a manual transmission, which is great for those who like to be more engaged with their driving experience. Now, the seller's being upfront that this is a project car, but there's a lot to like here. It's been garaged most of its life, which is always good news for a car of this vintage. They've already done some work on it too, rebuilt carburetors, new brakes, and a new battery. Plus, they say it runs and drives well, which is a great starting point for any project. But let's keep it real. This Corvair needs some love. The front seat upholstery needs replacing, and you'll need a new convertible top and windshield. The clutch chatter is something you'll want to address too. These aren't necessarily deal breakers, but they're definitely things to factor into your budget. On the bright side, the tires are still good, which is one less thing to worry about right off the bat. And with 109,000 miles on the clock, It's got some life experience but isn't completely worn out. At $4,500, this Corvair could be a pretty sweet deal for someone looking to get into classic car ownership without breaking the bank. These cars have a dedicated following, and a convertible in good condition can be a real head-turner. As always with project cars, you'll want to give this Corvair a thorough inspection before making a deal. Check for rust in the usual spots, especially given its age, and make sure that rear-mounted engine is as solid as the seller claims. But if everything checks out, this could be your ticket to owning a unique piece of American automotive history. Just imagine cruising down the strip in this white beauty, top down, enjoying that quirky rear-engine handling. With some elbow grease and a bit of investment, this '62 Corvair convertible could be a real showstopper.